Hello, and welcome to this video where we're going to continue our brief overview of ethical systems. This is a follow-up to our previous video on moral realism, where we're going to take a look at moral skepticism. So before we dive into what is moral skepticism, I think it's important to take a look at what skepticism is in relationship to kind of beliefs and value systems. And so basically the idea with skepticism is that skepticism is an individual that is, looking for evidence. They're looking for facts to back up a statement, or in this case of morality and ethics. They're going to be looking for credible evidence to support what is appropriate ethical behavior. Now, in contrast, different views of, kind of looking at situations and what to believe. Idealism over here is a certainty in a belief. I am so convinced that I don't need any further evidence. I believe what it is that I believe. And so the contrast to idealism would be cynicism. A cynic, or an individual that practices cynicism, is afraid to believe. They're going to, not want to make a decision. They're not going to basically want to make a decision about what it is to believe. They're going to be cynical about the ability to even accept the evidence. Another version of that would be those that indicate that pursue denial of things. So somebody that is practicing denial is going to refuse to believe. Regardless of the evidence you show me, I'm not going to get on board. I'm not going to follow through with what it is that you're saying. And then the contrast to that, gullible, again, kind of closer to idealism here. Gullible is a person that wants to believe, a person that could potentially be kind of accepting a lower standard of evidence, and so they may be kind of overconfident because they so want to believe in something that they will accept any type of evidence to support their view. But what we're going to focus in on is this view of skepticism, where they want to be convinced. They want to have good, reliable, credible evidence to support their view. Now, as a scientist, I subscribe to the skepticist view. And this is a quote by Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes novels, and he's quoted as to stating, "Healthy skepticism is the basis of all accurate observation." And so, we have the ability to be skeptical. We have the ability to, consider the strength and the accuracy and the reliability of evidence and be able to use that evidence to make an informed decision. And so as a scientist, that's the way I go through my life. And so hopefully for you, and what I'm presenting within these videos is, to be a healthy skeptic. To not take things on face value, but to really think about that and to gather the evidence that's necessary for you to make an appropriate decision. So looking at moral skepticism, we're basically looking at the antithesis of moral realism. And so for a moral skeptic, they are going to be kind of against what a moral realist stands for. A moral realist is saying that there are going to be moral facts that exist within the universe. So for a moral skeptic, they're going to deny that these moral values are going to be objectively factual. So that they may be present, but they're not an objective fact that is going to be there and apply to all people in all situations. Now, an extension of moral skepticism, kind of an extreme view, would be moral nihilism. In moral nihilism, the idea is that there are going to be no moral facts, no moral truths, and no moral knowledge. So the view of moral skepticism is associated with J.L. Mackie, and basically what this view says is that there are no objective moral facts. We have no evidence, we have no reason to believe that objective moral facts exist, and therefore, because no objective moral facts exist, we can't have objective values. We can't have this definitive right and definitive wrong which is present within the universe. This is not to say that moral statements are erroneous. They're not to say that moral statements should not be made, but it challenges that objective factor, that would be interpreted the same way regardless of the individual. So for a moral skepticist and J.L. Mackie, they're saying that moral statements have meaning, but they're really reflecting a subjective preference. The moral statement is going to be an indication of an individual's preference. It's going to be an indication of a societal or a cultural view. And so for a moral skeptic, they basically ascribe to an error theory that says it's a mistake to claim that there are objective moral facts, because basically this claim to moral objectivity is not self-validating. We can't prove that they exist, and so if we can't prove that they exist, we can't accept that they exist. So Mackie has made several arguments associated with moral skepticism. So the first argument is an argument from Relativity. And so the view of the moral skepticist is that there are no universal objective moral codes that are accepted by all people in all situations in all times, and therefore morality then is going to be culturally dependent. It's going to be dependent, basically going to that view of ethical relativism, it's going to be dependent on the situation, basically where that individual is within their group or their society. Now, this argument of relatively says, there aren't going to be these objective universal moral codes, but, for society's sake and for your sake, you really ought to conform to the rules of life that one takes part in. So when in Rome, do as the Romans. And so, there aren't objective moral facts, but, go along with what is accepted within the society or the group that you're within. Mackie had a further argument, this argument from the Queerness, and he basically challenged this view of objective moral facts. It says, okay, I'll work with you on this one. If objective moral facts exist, what are their form? What is it made of? And where is it? Where does it exist? We don't know. It goes back to that metaphysical argument within moral realism. And so we can't provide direct evidence based on our observations. We can't provide direct evidence based on our senses and our ability to kind of study what this moral fact would be. But Mackie took it a step further and says, okay, you can't prove that it exists, but even if it did exist, they would be really strange. It would be very different from what we view in the world around us. And the strangeness corresponds to Mackie's argument from the Queerness, that it would basically be so strange that it would be viewed as queer to interpret these moral facts. So then Mackie's final argument that we're going to talk about is Mackie's argument of projection. And so this view that objective values exist, that view of moral realism, is a result of people projecting our views, projecting our interpretations onto the world around us. And so Hume has had a statement that our minds try to spread itself onto external objects. So for Mackie, this is described as a pathetic fallacy. This is a failure of basically the moral realist view. And so Mackie says our tendency to read feelings and project those feelings onto objects does not make those objects have feelings. It does not make those objects have the values that we'd associate with it. And so an example over here, I've got an image of a dog posing proudly, and it's the title of it here. A very patriotic dog. He's got the sunglasses on. He's got red, white, and blue, so he's all ready for a 4th of July parade. He's going to be very patriotic. But in reality, the dog probably doesn't know he's a citizen of the United States. Is he even a citizen of the United States? Can he be patriotic? And this is really just projecting the owner's values this owner's patriotic values. Let's celebrate, the 4th of July potentially with the red, white, and blue. But he's projecting that onto the dog in this case. And so Mackie's argument from projection is that, moral values, yeah, they may exist, but they're really just a projection of us onto society, onto others, in order to have them, again, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, to project that, kind of societal kind of viewpoint. So therefore, for a moral skepticist, they are going to view morality as being a human invention. It is going to be created by man. It is going to be subjective based on that individual's culture and society, and it's going to be projected onto others that are found within the society. And so it is a human invention because there is a practical role of morality. If we didn't have morality, basically anything could go. We need to be able to know what is acceptable and what is viewed poorly within society as a way to regulate behavior, to have people act in a way that is going to be beneficial to the community. And so therefore, morality is not metaphysical. It's not special in any way. It's not present and real within the universe. It's a creation of man. Man has created this in order to be able to control actions within society. And so whether we know it or not, we are inventing morality, the principles and the sanctions, the penalties associated with violating those principles in an effort to achieve social control in order to have, hopefully, peace within that cultural setting. So for a skeptic, you can extend this view to other things that are viewed kind of philosophically and ethically and morally. The Greek philosopher Xenophon said basically, is religion a human invention? And so basically for his view, didn't see the gods as being present, but saw that religion and gods had a role within society to control behavior, to pull people together into a common good, into the culture of that society. But for Xenophon, he basically said that, like that previous slide saying that for a skeptic, man created morality. For Xenophon, he's basically saying man created God. In a flip side to what's in many religions, God is created in an image of one's group. And so man created God in his own image, as opposed to the traditional religious viewpoint that God created man within his image. So taking the views of the moral skepticist to one step further, basically to the extreme, we end up with moral nihilism. Nihilism is basically saying that there are no moral facts. And the reason for that is that these moral principles cannot be tested by observation. You can't see them, you can't experiment on them, you can't sense them in any ways, so therefore they don't exist. And so if moral principles don't exist, there's no moral truths. If there are no moral truths, there therefore is no moral knowledge. And therefore then morality is simply an illusion created by man in order to try to control other people. And so therefore for a moral nihilist, they're looking at morality being basically a remnant, a superstitious remnant of religion that was created originally to control man, to follow the will of God. As society has moved away from a religious-based kind of culture, we need to maintain the morality in order to be able to maintain the control on what is appropriate behavior. So in arguing against moral realism, a moral nihilist will use the Disanalogy thesis. And basically this Disanalogy thesis says that these moral principles, these things that the moral realist says kind of exist, but we may not necessarily be able to view and to measure and observe. For the moral nihilist, they say that these principles cannot be tested by observation in the same way that scientific theories can. Therefore, moral facts do not exist in the same way that scientific facts do. Moral facts cannot be validated by observation and experimentation in the way that scientific facts are, and therefore scientific facts can be validated, moral facts cannot. Therefore, moral facts must not exist, and therefore moral nihilism is true. So before we end our view of moral skepticism, I wanted to give a little bit more of a defense of moral realism. For a moral realist, they may challenge those views of the ethical or the moral skepticist or the moral nihilist and say, yeah, we can accept this Disanalogy thesis. We can accept that moral facts can't be tested in the same way as scientific facts. But, in reality, not all truths, not all facts within the universe can be determined empirically. They can't be determined by direct observations. But we can still test these moral claims, but not using the scientific methods. And so you could take a look at moral facts about happiness and suffering, and they can be defended on intuitive views. They can be defended on religious views. They can be viewed on naturalistic views. So basically, you can look at something, a moral fact about promoting happiness can be determined by, is that action causing more happiness? A moral fact about reducing suffering can be tested by, did that action actually reduce the suffering that would have occurred if that person had not acted anyway? And so, yes, it is difficult to prove these moral facts, but we can still determine whether or not they have a beneficial or a detrimental outcome by looking at what is the result of their actions. So to extend this to a specific example in defense of moral realism, this idea is that there are certain things within our universe, and we're going to extend those certain things to include moral facts, that are universal and have supervening properties. And so if we take a look at an object that has color associated with it, does that object have color in and of itself? Does that color really exist? Or is that color based on our perception of the light coming into our eyes and hitting the receptors, the nerve cells on the back of the eyes that are going to convert that light signal into a nervous system signal? And you can argue that color is a property of light, but it's our perception that gives the color that presence, that gives that color its interpretation and its meaning. And so in the same way, we could argue that these moral properties are going to emerge from natural ones. And so a moral property would be something like being bad, doing inappropriate action. And so badness or inappropriateness could be a supervening property of pain. Pain can be viewed as being bad because pain contributes to a negative outcome. And therefore, a action that is causing increased pain could be viewed as morally bad because it's promoting that bad outcome associated with it. Thank you for listening to this video on moral skepticism and moral nihilism. Thank you and have a great day.